Welcome to the Shadow Signal, the frequency of the unknown. I'm Josh Rutledge.
And I'm Stefan Gearhart. Together we dive deep into high strangeness, UFOs, cryptids, the paranormal, psychic phenomenon, and the hidden truths that echo just beneath the surface.
Somewhere between reality and myth lies the signal. Can you hear it?
Tune in. The Shadow Signal is live. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first episode in our trilogy of paranormal podcasts, The Shadow Signal. I am your host, Stefan Gearhart, joined as always, and welcome back, Josh Rutledge. What's up, brother?
Man, it has been a long time since you and I have done a show together. Oh, I think over a year. I'm so stoked.
Not longer than that.
Yeah, I'm stoked just to get back into this and yeah, just try to pick up a little bit where we left off and just cover some strange
and as
stuff.
you guys can tell, we've rebranded, we've reshifted, we've re-evolved yet again from Fearscape, from the Convergence Enigma with Josh and Stefan to now the Shadow Signal. Why are we calling this the Shadow Signal, Josh?
Well, because it does seem like there's some sort of an underlying purveyance of the phenomena that's just continuing to echo throughout space and time. And it does seem to attract people to it, to want to learn more, to want to understand their experiences, almost like it's a beacon drawing them home.
Exactly. And that's what I'm talking about, from spiritual stuff, from cryptids, from paranormal hauntings to UFOs to just everything you can think of that hits that shadow signal. That's what we're touching on. That's what we're going to be. That's what got me excited to come back, Josh.
Yeah. I'd like to think it's because you're going to be working with me again, but
So moving on, no, I am excited to work back with you, Josh. Like, I'm excited. I had a kid. She's 3. She's asleep right now, so that works out really, really good. I'm down in a basement in the middle of nowhere, it feels like, but I'm just back in Kentucky, man, and you're out in Phoenix. We've switched.
Yep.
We've flipped the roles.
We leapfrogged
it used to be.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
so,
I've been here now for 3 years. It'll be 3 years in like a week.
Wow.
Coming up on our move anniversary. So
yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, I'm happy to be back in Kentucky, being back around, our mentor, Keith Age. Been talking to him quite a bit, talking about ghosts and hauntings, and wanted to bring this up, the Henry Clay building where you done your investigation and got that really cool picture of the little boy in the skating rink looking thing, is being turned into apartments. Yeah. So talk about a place that's going to be haunted as all get out. It's going to be the Henry Clay building in Louisville, Kentucky. It's going to be a set of apartments. So that's going to be very, very interesting for those wonderful, lucky folks that have no idea what they're going to be moving into.
It really makes me wonder if the folks that are doing that conversion are going to be happy about Bourbon Spirits, which is the show that Keith Age, is working on. That's going to be hosted on the YouTube channel here on
the Another Realm Network,
Another Realm Media. Yep. Because one of the episodes does feature that investigation at the Henry Clay, so it'll be interesting.
It's going to be very, very interesting. Speaking of hauntings and things along those lines, let's get into a little bit of going back and what are we calling this?
Interrupted transmissions. Let's do that.
Interrupted transmissions.
All right. So interrupted transmissions. I love this. This is kind of go back. This gives us an opportunity to catch up anyways. Kind of what kind of happenings has happened in our lives since last we spoke, which has been a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah. 3 years.
But, whether it's haunted, UFO sightings or the like, or things like that. But personally, what are some things that have happened since our last episode of the Convergence Enigma?
Yeah, which we kind of, I think, moved away from doing creepy catch up.
Yeah,
and started doing towards the end of the Convergence Enigma. So it's probably been a year and a half or even 2 years since we've shared some of our own experiences. So, for me, a lot has happened in that 2 year period of time.
Same.
And I can't cover it all, but I think I'll kind of cover the highlights.
The greatest hits.
Yeah, greatest hits. And a couple of those. There's well, right now, right this moment in Arizona, there seems to be a pretty heavy UFO flap happening. So
Yeah, yeah, I've been noticing that.
yeah. I've got an all sky camera that I built using like a Raspberry Pi and a astrological camera
Hmm.
that takes photos of the night sky every night, now during the day as well, and just randomly perusing those images, I've come across where I've caught some UFOs and things. So that's immediately happening in the now. Um, but yeah, I've had some other things where I was using my thermal camera here in my house to just figure out like where we had heat loss, or I guess heat
So
protrusion.
using it for what it's
Yeah,
for.
using it for what it's for, right? And I took a picture in my daughter's room, and upon going back and looking at that picture, there's obviously some sort of entity standing in front of the window. I went the very
Yeah, that's
next
an
day.
amazing picture.
Yeah. The very next day under the same conditions and took a photo, and it's not there. So it's definitely something, anomalous. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, just aside from that, a lot of, I went recently to Area 51 with our good friend Shane Hurd. That was an amazing
Shane Hurd
experience.
represent.
I had a hitchhiker come back with me from Area 51. That
That's
was
what you
not a
said.
cool experience.
Now,
Um,
please let the people know that you don't mean a physical guy in
no,
the car hitchhiking.
no, this is a term I think first kind of introduced with the Skinwalker Ranch
Hmm.
folks. The idea that there's these, energies, entities, whatever you want to call them, that will attach themselves to people and follow them home. And pretty much everybody who visits Skinwalker Ranch probably has some experience with a hitchhiker spirit or entity that has followed them back home.
You hear the same
Um,
about people that go visit Waverly in Louisville.
yeah, exactly. There's something about, it's almost like because you're intentionally looking for the phenomena
Right.
sees you, almost like it's looking back at you, and it attaches itself to you. Mine that came back with me, because I do a lot of energy work to protect and shield myself all the time, thanks to your teachings as well as our good friend Santosh. Um, I don't think it attached to me. I think it attached to my vehicle. But yeah, once I realized that it was here, I cleansed the house, I cleansed my vehicle, and it hasn't really bothered me since. But some of the, I guess, side effects of knowing that it was here was that my family, we were just like, as soon as I got back from Area 51, we were just nonstop at each other all the time, just angry, yelling, screaming, fighting. I got two kids; they fight regardless. But um, but this was more than that. You could tell it was intensified for some reason.
Right.
I was also seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye and stuff. So I figured I'd probably brought something back. So I did all the cleansing activities to take care of it.
Cool, man. For me, mine have been mostly, haunted type things. I started working when I moved to Louisville in a senior living facility, and
Hmm.
I've been seeing things
I bet.
there. Frequently, I feel touches, quite frequently, but the best one was I was coming around the corner to where our memory care unit is,
Mm.
and out of the corner of my eye, standing next to the door, was this woman that was dressed kind of like Jackie Kennedy would dress, like a
Okay.
houndstooth dress. It's like a pencil skirt and
Yep.
one of those pillbox hats, black hair, kind of in a bob. And then I kind of did a full blink and turn, and there was no one there,
Mm.
no one there. But clear as day, I could see this woman
Yeah.
standing there, and the building's only 10 years old, but I mean, that could have been someone that passed on, that
Yeah,
that's how
right.
they want to be seen, right?
Exactly.
So
We talked about this way back when we were doing, when the show started as Fearscape, that sometimes spirits, we think, choose how they are seen or interacted with by people. Like where you could see potentially a little girl, and me looking at the same exact spirit could see someone, a middle-aged person, because
yeah,
they can choose how they present themselves.
yep. But yeah, that's mostly been my experience, has been there at the facility. Haven't had much at home. Haven't seen a whole lot, excuse me, in the sky. Um, I do miss that about being in Phoenix. It just seemed
Mhm.
ripe, I guess, because the sky's so big out there.
Yep.
You
The
know
trees, framing it in for you.
that, and since I've got a 3-year old, I'm usually in bed by 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Yeah. No, I get that,
So,
especially when you have to get up and drive to work the next day.
mm-hmm,
So, I similar thing. I try to go out every night before I go to bed and look at the night sky, just because I don't want to lose the kind of whimsical notions of space and just the awesomeness that is everything that's around us all the time.
mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we do fall into the valley of the mundane and forget to realize and recognize all the magical things that happen all around us all the time.
Yeah,
So,
I'm actually going to look at the night sky tonight before I go to bed. We're recording this on June 1st, and I'm in a prime viewing zone for the Northern Lights
mm,
tonight. I saw a news article that Kentucky is well within the range to see it without a camera. So I'm gonna
that'd
get
be
out there
cool.
and see if I can see it tonight before I go to bed.
Are you going to try to video it?
If I see something, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you go out, and I'll tell you this, if you go out, and anybody who's listening to this, when it comes out, there, like I said, there's kind of a UFO flap happening here in Arizona. And I've seen some accounts of other people witnessing it in other parts of the country, in Iowa, Washington State. I even had my good friend, who lives up in Indiana, check it out, and he was able to witness it as well from Indiana. So, the where to look is to the northwest, at about 300, and if you got a compass and you look on your compass at about 316 degrees to the northwest, maybe 10 or 20 degrees off the horizon. So it, might be difficult with trees and stuff, but around 2.5 hours till around, well after midnight, well after 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, there's these random lights that just kind of
Mm,
appear in the northwest and drift towards the east and then disappear.
weird, weird. That's
So,
interesting.
if anybody who's listening to this when it comes out has, if you go out and take a look, I'd love to hear it in the comments if you've seen this stuff. So,
Yeah. And before we get into our main topic for tonight, I did want to briefly mention, kind of talk about kind of some spooky news, so to speak,
mhm.
is that's running rampant right now in the UFO community, is this dog whistle.
Yeah,
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that for those. I know you know more about it than I do, so if you're okay with that, I didn't mean to put you on the
yeah,
spot about it, but talk about the dog whistle, and how they can find that, and what it supposedly does. Because what I saw was, I forget who posted it today. They were said it's 100% every time
mm.
it's used.
Yeah. It was introduced with there's a show on YouTube. There's a whole channel actually called Skywatcher.
Mm-hmm.
And these are, if you've been in the UFO community, or if you're not, and you're familiar with the person Jake Barber, who came out a couple of months ago with supposedly, as a part of a government crash retrieval program, was out retrieving UFOs and government kind of, skunk works types craft that would crash. And so, Jake Barber came on the scene, his team came on the scene, and then now, a couple months later, Skywatcher has kind of come onto the scene, consisting of a lot of the members of that interview of that crash retrieval program. And they, first tease the idea of a psionics, which is not to be confused with the camera, the night vision camera, but
Right.
it is a person who does, kind of like a CE5 type situation where they go
Hmm.
out, they meditate, and they try to connect with and attract these craft to wherever they happen to be set up at. Then we learned a couple weeks ago about, or I guess when this comes out, maybe a month and a half ago, that they also employ a machine lure, if you will, called the UAP dog whistle. And it consists of five or so, maybe six different tones that are kind of mixed together. So there's the 7.83, which is the Schumann resonance, which is supposedly, kind of the resonant frequency of the Earth. Um, there is 432 megahertz, which is often associated with kind of love and
Mm.
healing. There's 528, which is also associated with love and healing. There are bursts at 17 kilohertz and 2.5 kilohertz that just kind of randomly kind of burst in the sound file. Kilohertz obviously so high in frequency that, or I guess maybe low in frequency, depending on how you look at it. We can't hear them, but
Right.
supposedly when you play this file, though, when you play these collection of sounds, it doesn't matter how loud you play them. You don't have to broadcast them, in your home stereo system or whatever. The volume doesn't matter because it's more about the frequencies that are produced. And supposedly, like you said, a lot of people who go out and play these frequencies have then UAP sightings
Right.
that they have. Um, so the you can, if you go and Google UAP dog whistle, it'll come up. And there's a lot of different sites that have kind of created the code on a website where you can run it. I also have a website that I use for my LLC, which is for like mentorship and kind of mystical liaison, if you will. And that is ourmysticjourneys.com. And I've got it on there as well if you want to go to ourmysticjourneys.com and you can play the UAP dog whistle. But yeah, I actually was out, like I said, our friend Shane last night at his house. We played the UAP dog whistle and we got some hits. I mean, it does seem to work.
Yeah,
Uh,
which is interesting because I mean, good God, how many nights did we go out to Shane's and saw nothing?
yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's actually the frequency that's doing, that's doing the work, or maybe just because your willingness to accept that the frequency will produce a UFO sighting that triggers something in your mind that,
Right.
previously you were skeptical or cynical about the process, but because your willingness to play the sound that flips something in your mind that now all of a sudden this is possible. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, we've both been big believers in that tone,
Yeah.
using tones or a shadow signal, so to speak.
Well, yeah. Look, see what you did there. We're gonna
Even the CE5 meditation has tones
right.
to it, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, and Stephen
So,
Greer supposedly has these tones that they captured when crop circles were being made.
right.
That you play as a part of the CE5 app. Last night, funny enough, was with Shane. We played both tones. I played the
Hmm.
UAP dog whistle, and he played the CE5 tones. We played the same, and again, we got some results. So we don't know really which one was the attractor, but it doesn't matter as long as you got results, right? So
Yep, that's right. Yeah, somebody that I wish I could remember whose post I saw that was talking about it, but they were like, maybe it's not allowing you to see UFOs as much as it's allowing them to finally see you,
hmm, maybe, and
like
like I
using
said,
the dog whistle.
maybe it's that mental, spiritual
Right.
mentality of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, if you think about the X-Men movie when or I'm sure this was true in like comics and the cartoon series and stuff, but when Charles would put on the cerebral helmet and he would see all the, humans as like gray figures and then he would
Right.
see the mutants as like red figures. I would imagine that it's kind of like that. Like we're all existing in this kind of gray existence. But then when we're willing to turn on the possible, we flip that switch in our head, now we become a red beacon, if you will, amongst the gray. And like you
Yeah.
said, maybe they can see us then.
Yep. Well, again, it's not something I have experienced yet, but plan on experiencing.
Yeah, so maybe when you go out to do the Aurora Borealis tonight, you could just have it playing on your phone for while you're out there and see if you see anything unique.
Yeah, not a bad idea at all. Not a bad idea at all. And speaking of unique, let's get into our topic for tonight.
The main story. All right. So tonight we are talking about, and I'm probably going to butcher the last name. I'm going to do my best. But Linda Napolitano.
Napolitano sounds good.
Napolitano. Okay.
Sounds good to
Um,
me.
and you know, uh, at the time when it happened, and I think probably still acclaimed to be one of the strangest, kind of most important, but also most controversial
Mm-hmm.
abduction cases in history. Um, and it's recently kind of gotten a reboot because of a short docu series that was done on Netflix about it.
Right.
But yeah, so we'll go ahead and kind of jump into it. But a very, very high level synopsis, okay,
High
is
level.
high level. A woman floats out of her 12th story window in the middle of the night. No sound, no resistance, just a blue light from above. And the city never stopped moving, but people nearby on the Brooklyn Bridge saw it happen.
Yep.
I
And
mean,
now, ladies and gentlemen, you know as much as I know.
um, so yeah, it's a very interesting case. In preparation for this episode, I watched the Netflix event as well as doing obviously a lot of research
Mm-hmm.
into it. And I have my own opinions on some things, and towards the end of the show when we get to that stage, I want to kind of voice some of those opinions. But um, yeah, I mean, basically, you've got this person named, like I said, Linda Napolitano. She's a Manhattan housewife. I think for a little while she had maybe a pseudonym of Cortile. And so, you know, what started out was her and her husband went to the Catskills for, like a little getaway. And while she was in the Catskills, she has what she thinks is this just crazy dream where she's flying over top, floating in the air over top of the trees, and she goes kind of in taking aboard this craft.
Right.
Um, and the next morning when she wakes up, she's got a bloody nose and is just doesn't really know what to do about the whole thing. And so she had started reading a book that Budd Hopkins at the time had written. Budd Hopkins, really set a name for himself as this kind of core researcher of the alien abduction phenomena. In
Right.
a lot of circles, he's put into the same circle as like people like John Mack and others that were also
Right.
researching.
He was the guy that did the path or the regression stuff on Whitley
Yeah,
Strieber, right?
right, exactly. And
Yeah.
he was his big, I guess, approach to everything was, let's get you into hypnotic state and let's figure out, what the subconscious knows that, it's blocking from your everyday life.
Right.
Um, and that methodology has also that kind of has introduced a lot of controversy because of the people who don't put a lot of stake or credibility in hypnosis alone as a sole means of evidence procurement.
Right.
But she read a little bit of this book from Budd Hopkins, and I think the book was Intruders. It was like his second book that he wrote, like '87, I think. Um, And she got a little ways into it, and so much of what she was reading in the book really resonated with her. I think we've all been there. We've read
Yeah,
some book on the
100%.
topic, and it just really resonates with you.
Or
And
us,
so,
all the books on the topic.
yeah, or all the books, right? Um, and so she closes the book and sits down and writes a letter to Budd Hopkins describing the event that had happened to her in the Catskills. Bud gets the letter. He's intrigued and he calls her to set up for her to come in because he's also in New York for her to come in and do, more of an in-person interview about what it is that had taken place in the Catskills. And from there they developed, a friendship. He's Bud was married at the time to an individual. I'm totally blanking on her name. I've got it here. We just want to minute. Oh, Carol. Carol was her name. Um, and so Carol has a video camera, and so she just starts videoing all these different interviews and things like that. And so this is where a lot of the, I guess, footage from the interviews of Linda and other things really comes from, is from Carol being present at a lot of the sessions that were had with Budd Hopkins. Um, so well, first of all, did you, this happened in 89. Um, did you hear anything about this in 89? I mean, I was 11.
Yeah, I was 10.
I mean, I don't,
I was busy watching the new Batman movie and Ghostbusters too.
yeah, I mean, I don't, I think that for me, my foray into the unknown really didn't happen until I was in high school. And really that was because of the X-Files.
Yeah.
Um, when I really started to get into it.
Yeah,
Uh,
UFO stuff. I think the first real case that I remember hearing was the Phoenix Lights.
Phoenix Lights, yeah.
Yeah.
Which that was, we were seniors in high school, when that
Mhm.
happened. But yeah, I mean, so I don't remember anything about this story, but it's really interesting when you watch the Netflix series on it. They have a lot of footage that was obtained from, I guess they went on like, Maury Povich, and they went on,
Right.
those types of shows, some based in New York, some more national. They were on Oprah talking about it. So I mean, it was a pretty big kind of headline, if you will, for the
Right.
time. So Linda and Bud are talking about her Catskills case. And then one day Linda calls Bud and says, and she's like, disturbed. She's kind of freaking out on the phone and says, I think they took me last night. So this is amazing because
Right.
in the first situation, the Catskills, it's remote, right? There's cabins spread across the countryside, but it's not densely populated like downtown Manhattan. And so for them to have taken her the previous night, she lives in a high-rise apartment building. There's just a lot of, Bud's immediate response was like, there had to have been people who
Yeah.
saw this happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's not Vegas, but it's still a city that doesn't sleep.
Exactly. Well, and apparently her building is really close to the Brooklyn Bridge, and so you would have had all that, bridge traffic that was going by, so on and so forth. So, kind of the synopsis of the event that happened in Manhattan. This is the one that, kind of made the case, if you will,
Right.
for everything. Is on November 30th, 1989. Um, Linda's account was that she went to bed. She was kind of woken up, and something floated her out of her bedroom window in a blue beam of light. She recalled that she kind of felt paralyzed. Again, she was on the 12th floor of her building. She was floated up into the sky and went into this craft. Now, she describes the what she went into in this craft was like she was flying into lava.
Oh,
Um, it was that kind of, really, I guess, molten type feeling that, of this
yeah.
substance that she was flying into. I'd like to take an aside and just point out that a lot of people talk about these craft sometimes appearing to drip molten material as they
Mm.
kind of move around. Our good friend David Parker here in Phoenix, who witnessed really close the Phoenix lights, he also described as seeing one of the crafts dripping this kind of molten magma lava type stuff from
Yeah,
the
it's
craft.
interesting. My experience, I remember the walls seemed wet, organic, and then even in the end, which I know listeners, you don't know my story yet because I still haven't shared it, but there was a point where there was like a remember it was like a I said it looked like a waterfall or
Mhm.
something, something along those lines, but I couldn't piece it together. I wonder if that's a similar
Yeah, it's
thing.
also, I think, worth noting that when you're, and this is where I guess the hypnotic regression piece comes into play, because when you're recalling memory, whether it be hypnotic regression or just memory of something that you dreamt about last night, or even something that you experienced last week, the brain processes things in weird ways. And so, not discounting her story, because only she experienced it, and I'm not in a possibility or a place to be able to say one thing is true versus another. But I think sometimes that what we perceive and how our brains process what we're seeing is it describes the closest thing that we can think of, molten
Right.
lava. But
Yeah.
who knows what it actually could have been. So
Yeah. Whipped whipped topping.
yeah.
Cool
um
whip.
cool whip. So anyways, then the really, well, so she's on the board the craft, having gone through this kind of lava stuff with three gray beings, and they take a very long needle and they insert it into her abdomen.
Ugh.
Um, and so then she, finds herself the next day. She wakes up, and again she's got kind of this bloody nose. Um, so some of the and we'll get to that. There's another piece with that bloody nose piece that we'll get to in a little bit, but some of the kind of alleged witnesses that happened to have seen this were supposedly two security agents. Dan and Richard was the names ascribed to them, but they never came public, so we don't really know what their true names were. But they were supposedly escorting a UN, the Secretary General of the UN, and saw this woman being floated out of her apartment building
Yeah,
and
that's
up
what I was
in
gonna
the
ask.
sky.
So what did they see? So they
Yeah.
saw
So
her
they saw
floating.
from the bridge, from the Brooklyn Bridge, her floating out of her building and up into the sky, up into a light in the sky.
Hmm.
Um, and so what was really interesting, I thought, was that kind of out of the woodwork, there was a preponderance, if you will, of witnesses that came forward saying that they saw something similar. A total of 23 witnesses.
Jeez.
But here's the
Here's
catch.
the kicker, yeah.
Of those 23 witnesses, none of them their real names have never been publicly made available, and they've never been verified.
Hmm.
At some point in time, the UN Secretary General was asked about the case, and it was Javier Perez de Cular, probably saying that wrong, but he he didn't acknowledge the case, but he didn't dismiss the case. He just refused to answer. So it's kind of like one of those situations where, is pleading the fifth, even though in the court system, not an admission of guilt, in the matter
Right,
of public eye, is pleading the fifth an admission of guilt. So
right,
is refusing to say no to a question kind of the same thing as saying yes to it.
right. Exactly.
Um, So I mentioned about the blood coming out of her nose, both in the Catskills event as well as in the Manhattan event. So she started looking at these pictures of herself with her son, and she noticed in all these pictures that her nose looked crooked. And she was like, "I've never had a crooked nose. I don't know what's going on."
Hmm.
So then she started looking at it closely, and she noticed that there was like a lump on the side of her nose, kind of in the middle of her nose, up near her, in like the nasal cavity area. And
Flashbacks to Total Recall, man.
yeah, really. And so she goes to the doctor to find out, what's going on. The doctor takes a look up inside of her nose, and he's like, you've had nose surgery because there's a scar inside your nose. And she's like, well, maybe I just scratched it, um, digging for gold. And he says, no, it's definitely, a scar made by a scalpel. So they do an x-ray, and there is some obtrusion up in her nose on this x-ray. So she sends all this to Budd Hopkins. And, I think uh, for Budd, where, he is really based, starting out as an artist,
Right.
and then, it was never really a trained scientist. He kind of self-taught, if you will, to
Right.
become this investigator and scientist. And so for him, I think, he's looking for the case that is just going to blow the lid off this thing. And so he sees this in Linda's case. And his wife at the time, Carol Rainey, she later wrote an article about the very unscientific approaches that Budd would take
Right.
to his investigations. And so that's kind of the controversy of this whole thing is that,
Yeah,
um,
Bud has become very controversial over the years.
yeah.
So,
But that he did not really, although he ascribed to be a self-taught scientist, he didn't really follow the scientific method. He exhibited confirmation bias quite a bit, and just would ignore inconsistencies in testimony and data if they didn't support his theories and
right.
hypotheses. And so it's kind of this brings me to kind of my first thought and insight here is that again, Linda has not, I wasn't there. I don't know her experience, and so I don't want to discount it. But I think that because Bud saw an opportunity here for Linda's case to really solidify him and his theories and all these things that he was putting out and espousing, that he may have, you know, ignored some evidence that would have been, in contradiction to some of the things that Linda
Yeah.
was saying. Um, there's Carol Rainey in her article. She accused him directly of leading witnesses.
Right.
As a MUFON field investigator, it's something that I go through, when I went through my training, they really talk a lot about, don't ask questions like, so you went into the craft and then what did you see? Right? Because you're
Right.
you're you're leading the witness. But I could certainly see, and I have seen in some of the recordings and things of Bud in the interviews that he conducted, that is certainly was his approach. Um, so it's often, I wonder if, let's say, you had an experience that you thought could change the nature of how humans view ourselves or reality.
Right.
How far would you go to prove that truth? Would you, do you think you would maybe lead witnesses, or
Right.
would you also exhibit confirmation bias? I know that I find myself having to catch myself that I
Yeah,
do it at times.
for sure. Especially if you've had your own experiences. you
Right.
know.
And one of the things we've talked about on previous episodes of the podcast is that I think a lot of people in the community have their own theories about what the phenomena is, and they accept evidence that support that theory and they deny evidence that doesn't. And so even within our own community, some of the top names in our community even
Yeah.
have that confirmation bias that they apply and aren't willing to examine, you know, how this new information could evolve or
Yep.
change their theories in a different way.
Yeah.
So basically, you've got Linda had the situation where she floated out of her house. These 23 plus supposed witnesses experienced it. Linda was regressed, and during her regression, a lot of the information that she had given about her case was confirmed in her regression, and additional information as well. that supported Budd's assertion that this was a part of some bigger hybridization program.
Right.
That's really Budd's also claim to fame is that a lot of abductions, especially of women, some of men as well. We covered love and saucers,
Yeah.
on the our previous episodes, um, where these people are taken and either ovum are collected or sperm is collected, and there's some sort of a greater effort to produce a hybridization race between alien and human for some means that is beyond our understanding at the moment.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, that very well could be true as well. Um, what we understand and how we understand about the human genome is relatively limited.
Yeah. The thing I was thinking about is this. If I would have woken up remembering that someone shoved a big needle into my abdomen, I would be looking for a needle mark, right?
Yeah, and I think I don't know. Now you're gonna put me on the spot. I think I saw that she did have a puncture mark on her
Yeah.
stomach. Um, but I'll have to go back and look that up, and maybe I can add a little comment or something after the episode comes out, for if I was able to find that information. I do, like I said, I recall the bloody nose and the finding the thing that was in her nose, but I can't remember if she actually had a picture of a puncture wound on her stomach. But you know, she did at one point in time, several weeks, months later, after the Manhattan event. She had another similar situation where um, the beings returned. This time, when she came back or whatever, or woke up, came out of her situation, her trance or whatever it was, she went into the hallway and she found her family all standing in the hallway, and they also had nosebleeds.
That would creep me out.
And there's been a lot of we've talked to other
Yeah.
people, right? Kathleen Martin, Andrea Perrin, and others that talk about kind of a generational aspect to abduction or
Yeah.
contact. Um, so it makes me wonder if that was the first time her family had actually been involved in the abduction, or just the one time that she happened to catch them or see the result. So,
Yeah.
um, but like I said, it does. There is support for us. John Mack found that there was a lot of times these repeat experiences across these generations. And so, is it because they're targeting them for their genetic makeup? Is it because
Right.
there's, some other aspect that we don't understand? But it's an interesting part of the puzzle that I think oftentimes goes overlooked.
Right.
I got a question for you, just out of curiosity. Um, do you think that because you've had again, people don't know your story, but you've had an abduction experience, do you think it follows your generational lines?
Yeah, I wonder about that myself. Um, I was just thinking about that, wondering if it goes back, you know, uh, in some ways, I feel like I don't know about abduction as much as like I know some spiritual gifts and things like
Yeah.
that definitely go back generationally. But then I wonder, what about my daughter? Is that
Mm,
that makes me fear for her.
mm.
Like is something going to happen? Or I don't know. That's a tough question. You know,
Yeah, and
especially because our parents' generation, boomers, they don't like to talk about this stuff.
yeah, but I know that they've had it. I know that they've had,
Hmm.
because there have been people who have come forward from their generation.
Oh
So
yeah,
but like you said, they have held on quite firmly to the taboo associated to the topic.
right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, because you mentioned, I think that your grandma
Hmm.
also had a lot of different psychic gifts and
Yep,
things.
my grandma Carol,
And
my
we've
dad's side.
and we've talked about, also in previous episodes of the show that um, maybe, the fairies and the gnomes and the dwarves of the 17 and 1600s are the extraterrestrials of today.
Right,
So, things that people maybe ascribed as the ability to see gnomes is the same ability to see grays.
right, 100%.
So as I mentioned in the beginning, there is rather a Manhattan alien abduction Netflix docuseries. It's 3 episodes long, each one about 45 minutes. And it kind of put Linda and her story back into the spotlight. Carol Rainey, if you recall, remember Carol is the
Yeah,
husband or the wife of Budd Hopkins. She's featured in the docuseries as well, and she challenges pretty heavily Linda's credibility throughout the whole documentary,
interesting.
which caused Linda to sue Netflix for defamation.
Interesting.
I guess Linda was told that Carol was going to be in the film, but she wasn't told to what extent Carol was going to be used to basically serve as the, kind of cynic's view of Linda's, story.
Right.
So yeah, Linda, like I said, has sued Netflix for defamation. And I don't think that case has been resolved yet. But I think that there's pretty much a pretty, public split on uh, their acceptance or belief of the case. Some people, like with all abduction cases, there are some people who believe, that it happened and it's legitimate, and there are some people who don't. I also find that for a lot of people who have been abductees, they're more likely to believe other abductees. And those who have never been an abductee, or at least they don't know if they've been an abductee or not, are
Right.
less likely to believe it. So,
Yep.
um, but yeah, it's a very interesting case. Um, and if true, I think really just kind of echoes the idea that the only limitations that the only perceived limitations that ET or aliens have are those that we apply to them, because apparently they can go anywhere, be anywhere, take you from anywhere,
Yeah, even
um,
Manhattan.
even Manhattan, right? So, I don't know the fact that Bud was really looking really hard for, Lyndon to be his smoking gun. How much of that played into the public reception of Linda's case. But even, one of the things that we always talk about when it comes to these kind of older cases is that Linda has to this day never changed her tune. She's never changed
Right.
her story. It hasn't fluctuated. It's always been the same. And so it really makes you, I think, from that regard, she could have remembered things differently over the last 40 or 50 years, but she
Sure.
hasn't.
Yeah.
And so, that to me gives it more precedence because,
Yeah.
myself, my own memory that I had in August of 2019 asked to remember every aspect of it in exact clarity as if it happened yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm interested to see, listeners, viewers, what are your thoughts? Do you think Linda was abducted? Was she abducted in the Catskills? Was she abducted in Manhattan?
Manhattan.
Was her family targeted? Is she continuing to be abducted?
Yeah, just not sharing stories.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd love to hear, drop a comment. Find us on the socials, drop a comment. We'd love to hear about it. Um, it's just a very interesting case, just like every other abduction case. I mean, I was talking to Shane about this yesterday. Other than the fact that it happened in Manhattan, this is not unlike a lot of other abduction cases.
Right.
In fact, this is pretty consistent with a lot of other abduction cases. So there seems to be an MO, if you will,
Yeah.
for abduction cases. Um, and yeah. And if you were an abductee, and you're, not you, Stefan, but a listener, were an abductee, I'd love to hear, your perspective on the whole abduction phenomena as well.
Yeah, and you can reach out to us. You can always email us. What's the new email address?
The Shadow Signal Podcast at gmail.com.
So you can email us there. Tell us your story. We always are always down to hear it. We always share those tales from the fearscape if they come across our 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 email. So
Yep. And don't forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, click the little bell. If you're listening to this on one of your podcast networks, click the option to follow,
review it if you can.
and drop us a review. I'd love to
Yep.
hear about it.
Or a
So,
couple stars. A couple
well,
stars,
more
you
than a
know?
couple. I'd like, 5 would be grand,
Five would be grand.
4 would be acceptable. Anything less than 3, just keep that opinion to yourself.
But so thank you, Josh, for doing the research on that. And as usual, if we could ever figure out a way to get her on the show, I'd love to interview her
Yeah.
herself. So if you're listening, let us know that you'd be interested.
Yeah, I mean, like I said repeatedly when conveying the research that I found. I mean, I don't distrust your opinion or whatever on the topic. Again, it's your experience, and who am I to say that it didn't happen?
That's right.
So I'd love to hear, yeah, your opinion, your direct opinion of what it is and what it means to you.
Yep. So this is a little bit of the taste of what's in store for the
Yep.
next season. The Shadow Signal, we're going to be hitting it from alien abductions to hauntings. We're going back to our roots in a way. We're going to be hitting it. And before we sign off, Josh, I did want to mention one person who I wanted to dedicate the episode to is a good friend of ours that passed recently,
Hmm.
Earl Grey, and just wanted to give a
Yep.
shout out to him. Good friend. He was on our show
He
our
was. Yeah.
before. Check
Just
out
a
that episode.
fantastic interviewer, fantastic person. And I was talking to somebody today about a MUFON case, and the person lives in California. And I was telling them to go check out the California chapter of MUFON. And I wanted to say and ask around about Earl Grey, but then it hit me, and I remembered that he was
He
gone.
passed
And so
on.
I was a little bit sad in the moment. But yeah, Earl is a fantastic person, a fantastic investigator, and he is definitely missed.
Yep. So I just wanted to give a shout out to him. Always will be an inspiration to us. Yep.
So, all right. Well,
All
thank you
right.
all
Yeah.
and for so much for tuning in. Again, love to hear comments, likes, find us on the socials, the Shadow Signal Podcast. And until next time, this is Josh. The truth is now.
And this has been Stefan. For now, keep your eyes on the skies. See you later, folks.
Bye, everybody.